This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Smile, the makers of the brand new PDF Pen 6, PDF Pen Pro 6, and PDF Pen for iPad and PDF Pen for iPhone. Find out more about all the flavors of PDF Pen at smilesoftware.com. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, it's been a while since we've had a one-on-one chat with Mr. Jeff Gamet of the Mac Observer. Unfortunately, that's not why we're here tonight.
Well, I'm out of here.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. You and I actually have on our slate to get together and just kind of riff on a number of topics, but I tried to put together a Mac jury tonight on this particular topic since it's very timely, and it seemed like everybody was either busy or, I don't know, maybe it's too hot to touch. But the topic is, of course, Tim Cook in front of a Senate subcommittee on Apple's tax strategy today. And I wanted to talk about this, Jeff. I don't know about you.
I thought we were here to talk about the whole debate that came out today about whether you pronounce it GIF or GIF.
Well, we could do that too. But
well, okay, awkward.
I don't think we'll have the same audience. All right, well, let's get that out of the way first. Which one is correct?
Well, now it all depends on who you talk to. Apparently the guy that created the format says it's GIF, but half of the rest of the world still says, no, it's GIF. What does he know?
Why if it's GIF,
unresolved?
Why if it's GIF would you spell it GIF? Why wouldn't you do JIF?
Because that's how you spell the peanut butter. I don't know.
Yeah. That's one of the few places I don't think you'd have to worry about copyright infringement. But who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
Computer file, peanut butter. Never mind.
You know, back when I was consulting, well, there are some people.
Okay. Oh, man. Jeff, I have to tell you, I've watched some of the things go across Twitter today. I've heard some things, and we'll get into it on the morning radio and the morning news, and it made my blood boil just a little bit. Now, these hearings are not over. What?
I'm surprised. Something related to ridiculous politics, and you got all fired up and angry. I'm shocked, I say.
Well, usually we don't bring politics to these shows, and we may or may not hear as part of the discussion. But the amount of judgments that were passed before even the first spoken word of testimony, the positions that were taken just because, in my opinion, of knee-jerk political positions on things, it once again, if it's something I know a little something about and I see how off the tracks it is, it makes me wonder about how off the tracks everything else is that I don't know anything about.
Yeah. And you said maybe we will or maybe we won't get into politics on this. This whole thing, I believe, is about politics. So we can do our best to be gentlemen about the politics, but I don't think we're going to be able to avoid discussing them.
Perhaps not. And of course, there are not two finer gentlemen around to try to avoid that topic. So,
yes, indeed.
So, you're the news guy. So maybe I'll ask you to do a quick summary of what so far has happened here. Because you wrote up a nice, concise piece for the Mac Observer, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Well, thank you. Okay, so the quick rundown is that the U.S. Senate has decided to look into the practices of companies that have money stored offshore, meaning outside the United States, and how these companies are doing that and what that has to do with their tax liability, and whether or not companies are sheltering money from taxes that shouldn't be sheltered. And so Apple got called into all of this to testify at a hearing, and CEO Tim Cook and CFO Peter Oppenheimer specifically were subpoenaed to speak. And Apple's stance is, yeah, we have lots of money offshore. but that's because that's where the money started. And we'd love to bring some of that into the United States, but wow, you're really going to ding us hard for doing that. So it doesn't make sense. Tax laws need to change. And some senators are accusing Apple of intentionally abusing the law and working around the law to keep money outside of the United States so that they can avoid having to pay taxes on that money. So depending on who you talk to, people will believe whatever they want. And of course, there's no way for us to know the whole story. But in a nutshell, that's what this whole debate has been about.
Jeff, in your piece and everything that I've read so far, I've heard kind of these shadowy accusations of, I think you used the phrase, abusing the law. But I have not seen anyone that says specifically, this is the tax code, this is illegal, and Apple did this.
I think there's a reason why you haven't seen that.
All right, I'll let you say it. Why, Jeff?
Because Apple's not breaking the law.
Exactly.
And okay, so this is where I get really upset with this whole thing. So what we have is a situation where we have tax laws that Apple is working within, and they're probably pushing right up to the edge of what the law allows, but they're within the law, and that makes it okay. And so we have senators that are looking for new sources of revenue and are looking at the same tax laws and realize that the laws are allowing Apple and hundreds and hundreds of other big corporations to not bring money back in the country and not pay taxes on it. And it's the way the tax laws are written. So they're upset. But instead of addressing the actual issue, which is how do you reform tax laws to make a situation where it's reasonable for companies, where it's fiscally reasonable for companies to take this money that's outside the United States and bring it back in. And the tax laws, to allow that to happen, they need to change. So instead of addressing that, what do we have senators doing? They're posturing. And they're not doing anyone any good by this. So they've called Apple in to testify at a hearing where they know Apple has not broken any laws, yet they are questioning them as if they have. How many taxpayer dollars are going into this that could be going into fixing the tax code or into funding programs where that money needs to be?
Exactly. You and I did not talk before the show, except to arrange, a meeting time and all. And those are exactly my conclusions. I look at this and I feel like, and I have a lot of respect for Senator McCain, but this one he's so far off base on, and it really does look like, you said it, posturing. It looks like posturing by everyone but Senator Paul, who was...
No, he's posturing too.
Oh, is he? Okay.
I think.
Okay.
Yes. But continue.
Well, he sort of acknowledged at least some of the same things we are, that, the speed limit is 55 miles an hour. If you drive 55.0, you're within compliance. If you're technically, if you're at 55.1, you're speeding. Okay,
Yes.
So I'm with you. And I've said this, and I said it in a tweet today. This is what Congress always does. They blame business for playing aggressively with the rules that Congress itself makes.
Mm-hmm.
Gee, Jeff, do you think it could have anything to do with a lot of the time they vote for bills that have a lot of stuff in there that they don't bother to read? What a concept.
Yeah. Well, okay. I think there's a couple. There's a lot of problems here. I will focus on a couple. One being, we have laws that are so complex that I would be surprised if any senator is reading all of the text of a bill before it's passed into law. The other problem we have is that we have all of these other add-ins that get jammed into a bill, all the special interest things. So you can have a bill that's targeting, say, some environmental concern, but then it will have a bridge project tossed in to it, which is completely unrelated to what the bill is supposed to be for. But if you want to get the one senator's vote, well, you have to put in a little something something for him, and it happens to be this special project that generates some jobs in his voter area. And the next thing you know, you have this law that gets passed that address an environmental issue, builds 2 bridges, and adds in a holiday for some minor celebrity, or just a bunch of completely random things under the auspices of an Environmental Protection Act or something. And so when you get something that's incredibly complex, that is so complex that no one's going to be able to read through the entire thing, and you start throwing other stuff into it that's unrelated to the spirit of the bill, you're going to end up with problems. And you're going to end up with situations where you have senators that are now holding hearings to call Apple to task for complying with the law. And where are the other companies right now? Now, to be fair, Microsoft testified last year, and I forgot the name of the other company that testified at the same time as Microsoft. So sorry about that. But 2 companies did testify last year. Apple is testifying now, and I look at this and think, man, how many companies are going to be called to task for complying with the law, and how many taxpayer dollars are going to be spent so that we can have a bunch of politicians posture and grandstand. And really, I think that's what Senators McCain and Levin did yesterday, meaning the day before the hearings officially began. They were totally grandstanding. And Senator McCain, while I respect him as a veteran and a war hero, I'm having a really hard time respecting him as a politician.
Jeff, at this point, probably we should both step back. And we're talking about this here because it's a company we both know something about. Full disclosure, I have an investment in Apple. I don't know if you do.
I do not. I own stock in no company.
Okay.
At all.
Okay. So, I speak, I guess, partially from an investor standpoint, but also just from a business standpoint. Here's the position that Apple's management is in, and this seems to be lost on so many people. They are charged with obeying the law, all right, which we have seen no objective evidence that they are not.
Now, I want you to stop and think about what you just said and how crazy that is. They have been charged with obeying the law.
Well,
they have been called to task.
Okay.
by the permanent Senate investigation or Committee on Investigations for obeying the law.
That's not how I meant it, but it's an interesting twist of words. You're absolutely right. So perhaps I'll rephrase it for the purpose of this discussion. They have an obligation to obey the law as officers for Apple. I think the cat just knocked over something. That didn't sound good.
Yeah, I don't even know what's happened.
Over your other shoulder.
The funny thing is, there is a cat on either side.
Oh, is there? Okay, Jeff is
and
surrounded.
I shudder to think what got knocked over.
No, Apple's management is supposed to obey the law, which we've seen no objective evidence that they haven't. At the same time, they have obligations as management to the shareholders to maximize revenue, to make fiscally responsible decisions. In my mind, a fiscally responsible decision of minimizing taxes, minimizing taxes is a fiscally responsible decision to maximize the value. If they don't do that, then they are open to shareholder lawsuits and a lot of nasty stuff. I don't, again, and listen, we both may have to eat crow if something comes out where there was, something that wasn't right. But the way this whole thing has been handled, and one of the things that lit me up this morning, I heard something on the radio on the way to work this morning, a commentator who I usually think of as fairly balanced, started talking about Steve Jobs as, he's one of those liberals, and he believed he didn't want to pay taxes and all this. It's like, wait a minute, where's the evidence for this? There's no harder bitten businessman than Steve Jobs. I mean,
yeah, well, he had some liberal ideas. I would not be inclined to call him a liberal. A political liberal.
Exactly. And to tar and feather him because the company headquarters sits in California, it seemed to be the worst kind of knee-jerk reaction thing, generalization that does damage to everyone involved.
I would have to agree.
So I want to make another point, and feel free to interrupt me at any time, but Apple's not paying enough taxes according to these people. So let's talk a little bit about what Apple does contribute to the U.S. economy. Let's see. They do pay some taxes, no question about it, apparently.
Yes, $6 billion in taxes in 2012.
Well, that's just a detail.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
They employ a pile of people. I mean, a really big pile.
Yes, thousands of people.
Yes, and more. I mean, with the retail stores, I don't know what the count is. So they're generating revenue in every state. They sell products in the U.S., so that generates sales taxes. Mm-hmm. Let's see. The employees that they pay have to pay income tax on that money.
Right, and they're also buying products where they're paying sales tax.
Exactly. Let's see. They have a music store that sells products, and I do believe I'm paying sales tax on that every time I buy a track.
Yes, you are.
They have an app store. Wow. That, didn't I just see something that they're paying out, $1 billion?
They've paid $9 billion to developers so far.
Which those developers are paying income tax on that.
Right.
Apple's just not doing enough for the economy, Jeff.
Well, no, they're not. And we didn't even take into account the secondary jobs or the satellite jobs that are there because of Apple. What about the people that work in shipping companies that are delivering Apple products, both to the stores and to customers? And then what about the people that are working for companies that are making packaging for all of Apple's products? That's a lot of boxes that have to be printed and constructed just for all these products. And then you can take it out a little farther. Every place you have an Apple store, you have it's in a mall. And so Apple is now paying money to support the mall because they have to pay a lease. That means that they're putting money back into that local economy just by having a store. You're now paying for the staff that the mall has, like security people. And that extends out farther. And of course, I know I'm starting to take this to extremes, but what about the company that has to come and fix the parking lot on a regular basis so that people can come to the mall? So it's this whole symbiotic thing, and Apple is a big part of it, just like a lot of other companies are. And I'm just having a really hard time with the posturing that's going on, and ultimately the tax dollars that are being wasted so that we can have politicians doing their chest beating.
And I realize someone could write in and say, well, you're almost talking like the butterfly effect, that, no matter what Apple does, it's going to generate some effect. And yeah, that's true. But I think a lot of what we just said is directly attributable to Apple. It generates real revenue for taxation at a variety of levels.
Right.
I mean, if Apple went away tomorrow, there would be a lot of money that didn't get generated in taxes.
Yes, and Apple is paying about a 30% tax rate, as I recall. It might be just slightly over 30%. And there are other companies that are also very big and have been around even longer than Apple that are paying, say, 10, 13, 14, 15% tax. And the the standard tax rate for corporations, I believe, is 35%. So why aren't these companies that are able to pay 13% tax in front of this Senate committee?
Well, didn't I read, and forgive me because I read so much, I don't know if it was your piece or if it was somewhere else, that I wasn't completely clear on the math, but they were saying that Apple had an effective tax rate of like 1 or 2%, which it had to do with the offshore stuff. It was?
No, that was not my article.
There was someone that was trying to do the math and make it work with regard to some of the offshore money.
Okay. We are not in a position to be able to do that with the offshore money because none of us know exactly how much of that offshore money was generated in the United States. If it's offshore money that was generated offshore, Apple doesn't have to pay U.S. taxes on that unless they bring it into the country. And right now it'd be fiscally irresponsible for them to do that because they'll take an immediate 35% hit just to bring the money in the country. I mean, that's why they did bonds to raise cash for their stock buyback. It would have been a horrible abuse of their finances to bring the money in the country and buy the bonds back with that. They're able with the bonds. I don't think we actually know what their interest rate is, but because Apple's credit is so good, I would assume they're paying like a 1% rate, which is still a lot of money, but it's a lot less than 35%, which is what it would cost them to bring money in the country. And very likely money that wasn't even generated in this country. Most of Apple's revenue is generated outside the United States. People forget that the United States isn't the only place on the planet.
The newest version of PDF Pen from Smile is here. PDF Pen 6 can now export to Microsoft Word format and sports a new editing bar for faster access to tools and properties. PDF Pen 6 is also fully optimized for Retina displays, so it looks better than ever. And macOS 10 features autosave and versions are now fully supported. The new PDF Pen Pro 6 includes all that, plus gives users more control over document permission settings that restrict saving, printing, and copying, and simplifies creation of cross-platform interactive PDFs. Find out not only about all these new features, but all the capabilities of PDF Pen and PDF Pen Pro at smilesoftware.com. And if I'm thinking about this properly, Apple floated that bond issue. People invested in Apple by buying those bonds.
Buying the bonds, yes.
They're going to get paid interest. What happens when you get paid interest, Jeff?
Oh, you make money. Huh.
Well,
and then you pay taxes.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
So Apple, I mean, admittedly, it's going to be less than if they repatriated the money. But still, these are the details that seem to get overlooked and not talked about in favor of just a lot of bluster about, this is, if not the wealthiest corporation on the planet at this moment, certainly it's hovering there.
Right up there.
Yeah. And so it's popular to beat on Apple, and Apple's very visible. And this is what Congress seems to do. They beat their chest in front of a company like Apple, and we've seen it so many times. It's a bit of a witch hunt. So far, it seems like
yes.
Cook and Oppenheimer are acquitting themselves quite well, as far as I can see.
The parts that I've watched so far, I think have been doing a really good job of being professional through this whole thing, and they're clearly very sharp men. If anyone out there is concerned about their ability to handle their responsibilities at Apple, they should not be worried anymore. Just watching the way they've presented themselves at these hearings, just. That I'm really impressed.
So, Jeff, what would have happened if Steve had still been alive when this happened? I think the hearings would be a lot more interesting.
Yes, they would. But Steve was a master at working a crowd, and he would have played this so well because that's what he did. I mean, before he got in, he probably would have had some nuclear meltdowns, but they would have been behind closed doors. When the doors opened and he walked into that room, the show was on, and he was the master showman. And I think he would have handled himself just fantastically, but in a very different way than Tim Cook is.
Yeah, agreed. But Steve was known not to take, anything off of anyone. And I wonder, in a very professional, very Steve Jobs kind of way, I think there would have been a little bit of scolding going back in the other direction.
Yes, but it would have been wrapped in sugar.
Yeah. Well said. Well said.
And I think we get an idea of how Steve would have conducted himself in this situation by looking at the way he conducted himself in the Cupertino City building sessions, where he showed up and spoke to whichever committee that was and everyone else that was in the room. And he just charmed the pants off everyone. And he came across as this very humble, likable guy, just the next door neighbor everyone could get along with. And we know he's not humble, or was not humble. And we know a lot of people couldn't get along with him at all. Yet he could show up and just charm a room and have all the politicians up on stage going, "I use Apple products. Look what I use."
Yeah, that would be interesting to see just who's using what phones.
Yes.
But Jeff, as I recall, and that's a great example, there was someone on one of those committees that suggested that Apple should provide, what was it, free Wi-Fi for everyone?
Yes.
And Steve basically, said, I kind of think we contribute a whole lot to the local economy as it is. It may have been wrapped in a velvet glove, but it was a pretty solid
still
touch.
a slap.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yep.
And I believe he would have been doing the same thing in this hearing. And Tim Cook, he presents himself in a different way than Steve Jobs did, and I think that's great because they're not the same person. And Tim shouldn't be trying to emulate Steve. He should be Tim, just be himself.
Yeah.
And
And we're doing something we've both said we don't want to do. You don't want to look back and say, what would Steve have done? Too often. Once in a while, it's kind of fun, and I think in this scenario it is. But I'm with you. I think Tim and Oppenheimer have done a great job so far. And, to Congress, show us. Show us the documentation of where this is instead of grandstanding. Show us why Apple needs to be punished. And go change the laws if you don't like them. I mean, work with these people. How many companies would repatriate a whole lot of money if they weren't going to have an incredibly huge tax burden?
I think that there's quite a few that would. And I have a feeling with the posturing that Apple's doing that they would set an example and they would bring money in the country. And at that point say, look, we did it. What's holding up everyone else?
But you can't do it at the current tax rate because then your investors will be up in arms.
No, and part of Apple's posturing with all of this is to pressure Congress to change tax laws, and I think rightly so. And I would like to see other companies standing up and making as big a public proclamation that it's time for tax law change as Apple is doing. And I know there are a lot of companies that Apple works with and competes with that have all banded together to try and push for tax law reform and have been doing so for a couple years now, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
And we haven't seen anything happen yet. But on the other hand, Apple's now sitting in front of a committee being questioned about why they are complying with the tax laws. So maybe we are hitting a point where the efforts that all these companies have been pushing or working Wow. Could I have butchered that sentence worse? Let me try again. Maybe the efforts that all these companies are putting into getting tax law reform to happen is finally starting to pay off. There we go. I knew I could get the sentence out if I tried.
And it makes you wonder if maybe this was Congress's way of defending themselves, because they have allowed some of these tax laws to be enacted, to be maintained. I mean, the wisdom of this just blows me away, except to try. I mean, it encourages companies. I can't finish the sentence either. It encourages companies to do exactly what Apple's been doing, and a lot of other companies, to keep money offshore instead of repatriating it, because it's an excessive tax burden. And there's an option. Leave it over there.
Now, this is something that I haven't bothered to look up yet, and I probably should have. If the money has never been generated in the United States and it's in banks in other countries, bringing it in the United States would not be repatriating, it would be patriating, right? Because repatriating implies that the money was here, it was somehow funneled out to another country and is now being brought back in. And if I'm wrong on that, someone I'm sure will let me know, and I will stand corrected. Just like if it turns out that there's evidence that Apple has been illegally sheltering money, well, I will have a headline on Mac Observer. And since it comes out early in the morning and I'm always up early, it means I will probably be writing that article as well. So I will not defend Apple for breaking the law.
No,
so,
and there's one other thing here, and it sounds like maybe we're hedging our bets, but I don't think so. It's one thing to intentionally break the law. It's another one to inadvertently. And with the tax codes the way they are, I would hope and would think that Apple has retained, the best and brightest to make sure that they are within the scope of the law. But it's not impossible that, something got missed. And,
right.
That will be interesting if that has occurred, and neither one of us have any reason to believe it has. Just what a field day the general media will have with that, as opposed to portraying
absolutely.
it accurately.
Well, Apple has always been the company that the media loves to hate, and they hated Apple for a long time for doing things Apple's way. And now they hate Apple because Apple is on top. So it's one of those things. Apple just can't win when it comes to the general media. So yeah, if it turns out that they have violated tax laws, no matter how minor that may be, that would just get eaten up by the media.
There's one other lesson that I think we should share with everyone, both of us, everyone listening. If you take the time to go and take a quick scan of the headlines on major news sites, on some of the Mac sites too, look at it and consider just how much link bait was out there, how this story was reported on, how it was headlined everywhere. One place, you'd think Apple was guilty of causing the Oklahoma tornado. And, and something else, Apple is standing, up with a cape flapping in the wind for truth, justice, and the American way. I think the bottom line is Apple's a corporation. We've said that plenty of times. They're a business. They run like a business. They're there to maximize profits. They're there to maximize shareholders' value. It's not a hard equation. It's not hard to understand.
Right. And it doesn't matter what the company is or what the company's products are. The purpose of a company is to make money. And I don't care how altruistic you are as a CEO or as a corporation. Your job is to make money. And if you are being irresponsible with the money you have in a publicly traded company, well, you will be called to task for that. And you may find yourself in court at some point as well, either civil or criminal court, depending on how badly you've acted. So to expect companies to not look at ways to maximize their profits and to minimize their expenses, and taxes are an expense. Well, of course they're going to be doing those things. That's what companies do.
And there's nothing wrong with it.
No, there's nothing wrong with that at all.
I mean, you do it. I do it. Everybody does it. If I can get an adequate return on a tax-free municipal bond, I'm going to take the return. I'm not going to pay any tax on it. Completely legal.
Sure.
Why wouldn't I? As opposed to depending on your particular financial and investment situation, as opposed to taking maybe a corporate bond where I will get a higher yield, but I have to pay income tax on it. So I'm going to figure out what's best for me.
And then you're going to spend your money where you get the best return on your investment.
Amen. Amen.
Sure, that totally makes sense.
Yep. And that's just what most businesses do. I'm not saying there hasn't been some shaky things by some businesses, no question about it. And, this applies, like you said, it applies to Google, it applies to Amazon, it applies to Microsoft, it applies to everyone. They have certain parameters that they operate in. If they are violating those parameters, then they deserve to be fined and I'm not sure demonized, but definitely fined and pay the penalty, correct the problem, move on.
Yeah, if they're generating revenue that they're not paying taxes on in the United States and carting it out to other countries, and it turns out that revenue is generated by grinding up babies into fertilizer, let's go ahead and demonize.
Yeah. Thank you for that image, Jeff. Yeah. But if the money is being funneled offshore legally, close the loophole, Congress.
Right. And in this case, from what I've seen so far, it doesn't look like Apple has been funneling money out of the United States. It just so happens the majority of this money they have is outside the United States because that's where it started. The area that, to me, not being an attorney, and especially not being a tax attorney, that looks really kind of gray, but I'm betting it's not because Apple is not a stupid company. It's the way money works with their Irish subsidiary. And the way it works there, they've actually been able to avoid paying taxes on a certain amount of money altogether. And I can't imagine that they would do that unless they were absolutely certain that the law said, no, actually, you don't have to pay taxes on all of this money. Now, that has got to sting for the United States government and for Ireland, because that, however much money that is, I'm certain it's enough money that they would love to have a piece of it. But, like you said, change the laws and then take money. But if the law says no, they don't have to pay taxes on that. Okay, they don't have to pay taxes on it. And I don't expect them to pay taxes on it. And I do have a problem with some of the wording, excuse me, that I've seen or that I've heard coming out of the hearings about tax revenue that has been lost. I'm thinking it isn't really lost. It's just never been money that's been in a position where it could be taxed. So it's a lost opportunity on the part of Congress, but it's not lost money because it was never theirs to take in the first place.
I'd like to shut down just some feedback I'm sure we'll get. Our examples earlier in the show about how much money Apple generates in tax revenue in a variety of ways. In no way are Jeff and I saying that excuses anything here or that it entitles Apple to pay less income taxes in any situation.
Right.
It just, you need to see it and recognize that when somebody stands up, whether it's congressman or just a critic, and says, well, Apple's not paying any taxes or Apple's not paying its share, you got to look at the law. But they're definitely paying something. In fact, they're paying quite a bit. They're generating quite a bit more. So it just depends on, I guess, which lens you view the picture through.
Sure. And I don't see Apple as above the law. I don't see any other company as above the law either. All companies need to pay their fair share of taxes. And that's it. Just like as citizens of the United States, you and I are expected to pay our fair share of taxes. And if the law says we don't have to pay quite as much as we initially thought, well, great. Then we don't have to pay quite as much as we initially thought. That's how the law works.
Jeff, it seems so simple. Do you think you and I should run for Congress?
No.
Okay. Okay. Well, that shot.
I mean, let me think about it. No. No. That would burn the souls from our very bodies having to deal with that. I like us the way we are.
I don't know. I can see it now. Mr. Gamet goes to Washington.
Yeah, but the movie is done with me in a stretch limo where the back end is a hot tub, and I've got like a tumbler Maker's Mark in my hand, and I'm going woohoo, and it becomes more like a comedy as opposed. It won't end well, Chuck.
No, I don't. It doesn't even start well, Jeff.
No, it doesn't.
Well, hey, thank you so much for taking the time. Folks, this episode especially, I want to invite you, tweet me, tweet Jeff, stick some comments on the MacVoices website. We'd love to hear, your thinking on this. If you think that Jeff and I are off the mark, tell us why. And no knee-jerk politics. Tell us some good objective information. We'll re-examine our positions, but you've got an uphill battle.
Yeah, and keep in mind, people, you just actually got to watch a very special podcast because I don't talk politics or religion in public. And I just spent however long we've been talking going on about politics.
Yeah, Jeff, I don't think this is really politics. I think what we had is because we both haven't necessarily revealed our positions on a whole lot of controversial issues. We're just talking about this, and we're talking about it hopefully with a little bit of sense.
I hope so. So how about if I say this is the closest I have ever come to speaking politics publicly?
Okay. Well, I'm honored that you would do it here. Thank you.
Well, who else would I do this with, really?
Good point. Good point.
And thanks for having me on.
Folks, one other thing I want to say, most likely you will notice that there's a little difference in the production value of this. I'm going to try to post this a little faster than normal without the usual cuts and everything, just to get it out, because I think it's important that you see this and hear some of our discussions as the hearings continue and as the headlines continue to come out. So please accept that for what it is. Hopefully we didn't make too many big mistakes. And just remember, Jeff Gamet for Congress.
Why do you hate me, Chuck?
Folks, this is MacVoices. I'm Chuck Joyner. He's Jeff Gamet. Check our show notes, leave some comments, and we'll be back soon. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and for more Apple, Mac, and tech-related shows, including MacVoices, Mac Notables, the Mac Jury, and the MacVoices Briefing. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com.